Welcome to the FinOps video series. My name is Everett Berry. I'm the head of growth at Vantage, and I'm here with Warrick St, Director of Cloud Solutions and Digital Transformation at PBS. Warrick, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Everett. I appreciate you having me.
I want to start with your background. Where do you think your interest in FinOps came from?
And if I go all the way back to prior to even being a technology professional, I think my interest, ultimately the seed of my interest came from just the idea that I appreciate optimization and I want to optimize everything that I can because it allows me to have more of the things that I want. And so naturally in my career progression and now in the roles that I'm in, I want to support the organizations in achieving their objectives and exceeding them where possible by having more of the things we want, which are productivity and performance and money to invest, and less of the things we don't want, which are cost and waste and inefficiency. And so I think those principles have sort of just followed me throughout my career.
And so when you optimize and get more of something in the cloud, what is that more that you're getting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately in the cloud, the model is based on OpEx. And so you can have more resources, but you're going to pay more for them. And so I tend to think of things in terms of wanting more value. I want to have all of the nice things, but pay less for them. And ultimately in the cloud, I want the same level of compute. I want the same level of efficiency, but I want less wasted resources, less cycles to achieve full production. And so that's really what I think I'm after.
And so that optimization interest has come naturally to your role leading cloud architecture for
Yes.
PBS. Everybody knows PBS. I grew up watching PBS. But maybe give us some insight into why PBS is using the cloud and what workloads you're dealing with.
Okay. Yeah, so PBS, being the public broadcasting service, is a quasi-governmental organization. Our mission is to entertain and educate the American public. And we're doing that not so much in competition against other media organizations, but to deliver a lot of value to folks in every corner of this great nation. We receive both public dollars as well as donations, and our mission is to have the maximum reach of high quality content. And so we don't produce content, but we have a lot of partners and providers who do, and our workloads involve things such as the actual delivery of that content to end user devices like phones and web browsers and laptops, of students and parents all over the country. We're also doing a lot of transcoding of the actual media assets. And so those are just some of the workloads that we're dealing with.
And what role does cloud architecture play in managing all of that?
Yeah. So cloud architecture, in my opinion, it's an amalgamation of several things, but it's necessary because ultimately you get what you design, you get what you architect. And so for us, in order to achieve our objective of being a very streamlined and efficient organization, we want to be proactive and deliberate in the choices we're making and understanding the total cost of operating and therefore hopefully achieving those goals. We don't know, it's an assumption, so then we ultimately need tools that allow us to measure our progress and measure our success.
And so I remember watching PBS on cable, on TV. But over that past 20, 25 years, there has been a massive transformation, some would say a digital transformation. And so can you trace the history of how that happened at PBS and even what just the phrase digital transformation means to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so digital transformation, again, is another loaded term, but there's a concept of digitization, there's further refined concepts such as digitalization, and these things get sort of used interchangeably, and that's fine. I mean, ultimately, back in the 70s, PBS was delivering content that was receiving from content producers to stations all over the country across the broadcast network. So there were satellites, and we were broadcasting the content using satellite technology to CRTs and television sets. In this modern era, all devices have screens. All screens are sort of expected to be able to provide access to content, media content, and that access can be delivered efficiently using digitized methods. And so our objective is to provide easy access to the content that we're trying to deliver.
So I want to back up a bit on FinOps. Was there kind of a point in time where you recognized that the work that you were doing was FinOps, and did that change your perspective on the jobs to be done, or just even the materials and education you needed to arm yourself with in this new FinOps world?
Yes, I mean, I didn't start off in my role saying I am a FinOps engineer or I am a FinOps professional. I think it just became an outgrowth of the mission that I was on. And so the mission was to be able to communicate well with our stakeholders around the organization. And most businesses, most organizations, in the end, discuss and understand things from a financial perspective. So we are technology experts, and we have to operate, we have to design and manage technical systems. But eventually, there comes a time when you're going to communicate with stakeholders, and they're going to say, "Well, what am I getting for my dollar?" And so the need to have that communication, the need to be able to explain the value of what we were doing and to get additional investment, then necessitated the ability to tell a story about where we were going and to do so in financial terms. And I think that ultimately leads you down a path of needing to get better at FinOps.
Right, because FinOps, the portmanteau of finance and operations, the story that you're trying to tell is basically how the cloud is helping the business.
Yes.
And I think sometimes people think of FinOps as like cost optimization, which of course it is, as we opened with. But this aspect of explaining the effect of the cloud on the business and either what you're doing about it or your plans to do something about it is kind of the real magic of FinOps. What are some of the most effective storytelling methods that you've found for presenting all of the data, all of the usage and cost information to these higher level stakeholders who are in many cases kind of looking for a decision point?
Yeah. I think in the end, most decision makers are very busy, and so they want to get down to brass tacks. They don't necessarily want to become experts in modern technology or in the cloud, but they do have a responsibility, and they do ultimately want to understand the pipeline of product development and product delivery. They want to understand the categorization of cost and where value is being produced. And so it's a bit of a two-way street, but it is a big part of my job to understand how to communicate well with those individuals by understanding a little bit more about accounting terminology, understanding a little bit more, delving into their world of financial statements and financial reporting. Because when folks start asking for things like amortization schedules, you need to understand how to present the information correctly so that it can be consumed correctly and then make its way into these types of documents, which ultimately will get used to make decisions.
Yeah. Very interesting. Now, as a director level person, you're not necessarily clicking launch on EC2 instances anymore, but you do play a pretty close to the middle role in architecture and optimization. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to take us through some recent optimizations that you've had a hand in, and sort of like how the team went about implementing those.
Yeah, I think, although I'm not as hands-on as I once was, it is still important that all of the knowledge and understanding that I gained during that time, as well as the credibility that it affords me with engineering teams and operations teams that I work with today. The challenge, of course, is getting folks to care enough to build in the solutions that will lead to more efficient operations and ultimately achieve the financial objectives. And in order to do that, I think it's important to build up rapport, to build up a culture, for it to be there to be a two-way street, so that they can understand what my objectives are, and I need to be able to listen, be a good listener, to understand what are their priorities and how do we find interest convergence in terms of what we want to do. More recently, we've been able to achieve that. We've tried to take advantage of some of the cloud discount programs. And in order to do that, you may have the intention of wanting to do it, but in order to actually do it, you need cooperation. And in order to get that cooperation, we sat down with our engineering teams and we laid out for them. We did not want to surprise them, so we laid out for them where we are in terms of our utilization, what is possible if we optimize that utilization, and then work together with them to lay out a plan and to determine the timeframes on which those things could be achieved. And taking that approach seems to have worked really well because they had an opportunity to be stakeholders in the process.
Yeah. Going into a little bit this idea of discount strategy, one of the things that makes it challenging is AWS themselves are continually evolving how customers can save money on the platform through the official discount programs. And one recent change that a lot of folks are dealing with is the shift away from reserved instances, which can be quickly bought and sold on the RI marketplace, especially for enterprise customers. So when you're thinking about EDPs, PPAs, savings plans, RIs, what is the strategy for discounting, and how do you sort of start from we want to save money using these vehicles to actually doing so?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer to that is that we don't start off by focusing on discounts. We start off by architecting for low TCO, architecting some amount of variability in terms of how we're going to operate our infrastructure in the cloud and how our applications actually integrate and work. We want maximum flexibility within the constraints of whatever constraints the discount programs afford us. And in a lot of cases, there's a trade-off that's being made between commitments, commitments of a certain volume of storage or commitments of a certain volume of, consistency of utilization, which is a little bit of an antithesis of the cloud. The cloud is all about flexibility and about being able to quickly adapt and evolve.
Right.
So really we're trying to strike a balance, but we think that in the end, our best approach is to architect for absolute efficiency and then to get the maximum discount that we can from the discount programs. Because if the discount programs go away or if they change, we can still rest well at night knowing that our applications are as efficient as they can possibly be.
So turning to Vantage, PBS has been a long-time customer. How are you using the product today, and what challenges is Vantage solving for you?
So again, PBS has been working with Vantage for a number of years. We really love the product and the direction that the product is going in. One of the things that is different is that Vantage really engages us in collecting feedback and understanding how we use the product, and beyond just the tool itself, that's really important. But then the challenge for us is that we're in a relatively early stage in our FinOps journey, and as we mature and as our needs and the use cases evolve, we've found that Vantage is keeping pace with that. And so that's really refreshing because we don't want to have to change tools to find the mythical single pane of glass. So far, Vantage is that pane of glass.
Awesome. Yeah, the needs do evolve, right? So in the beginning, most people start with Cost Explorer, let's say. Just taking AWS as kind of the most common cloud. But then you quickly start to get into these situations where more is needed.
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those situations, having yourself just gone through that in the last few years, and kind of where the switch flipped from, Cost Explorer has this, to, okay, we need a tool. Yeah.
So for myself, in my previous role, we were primarily focused on, we were in one business unit, primarily focused on the workloads and products in that single business unit. And that business unit had made a bet on using AWS as their primary cloud provider. Now, in my new role, we are looking at platforms across multiple clouds. And so very quickly you get into a scenario where the cost management and cost accounting tool of the provider becomes limiting because you need something that is vendor agnostic. You realize that cloud has different meanings. It's an amalgamation of different terms. You've got infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. In order to properly illustrate costs to the folks that we're communicating with, we need a tool that has great integrations and great plugins, and Vantage does exactly that. And so that's one of the many reasons why it's become a go-to as we talk to folks around the organization.
Yeah, and Vantage does have different tools and workflows for different FinOps scenarios, right? So there's cost reporting, of course, there's budgeting, forecasting, tag management. I could probably just name like 50 things.
Yes.
Which ones of those, which features and workflows in the platform are you finding most useful today and making the most use of?
So most recently, I've really enjoyed segments. And segments, I think, brings together a number of tools, but with perspective and context. And from my point of view, the cloud becomes really powerful, and the work itself becomes really interesting when you start looking at different perspectives. More recently, I've been able to create a set of segments that allows us to look at the organizational structure and to allocate costs based on team. And then I went beyond that to say when I speak with people about the cloud, they usually want to know about a component of the platform. What is compute costing, or what is storage costing? And then we'll do a deeper dive. What is storage costing for a certain team? And through all of that perspective shift and needing to show costs back, in variable ways, Vantage is keeping pace with that. The other challenge is in preparing for reservations, to make reservation purchases, we need to do a lot of research.
Yeah.
AWS certainly publishes their price lists, but getting that information in a format that is usable and for modeling is a bit of a challenge, and Vantage has an excellent pricing console, and so we go there, we're able to use an API to pull in the pricing from Vantage's console, and then use that to do our modeling and to ensure that we're making the best purchasing decision that we can.
Yeah, and cost allocation segments is really one of those little bit more mature things on the FinOps continuum, because it kind of marries the understanding of the business and how the business is organized with the costs.
Yes.
And so for, let's say, a FinOps team just starting out, is segments and cost allocation the thing to start with, or what's kind of the precursor to being able to even start to build those?
I would say no, because even if you wanted to start with segments, you're most likely not going to be able to. And that's because the unspoken rule of cloud is that your FinOps is only as good as your tagging.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to ultimately provide the right perspective. And in order to provide that perspective, unless you've been really diligent or you're relatively new to the cloud, in those scenarios afford you the ability to contextualize costs by container. You can put different applications and different solutions in different accounts and have everything neatly laid out. But if you're brownfield, if you're an organization that had been in the cloud previously and are now trying to evolve and or needing to show your FinOps costs in a more complex way, then you need to get your tagging strategy correct. You need to understand where you want to go and do that preparation. Once you have that done, then everything else comes together.
Yep. And that relates to some of the stuff we've been talking about around tag remapping and just the challenges of getting that right.
Yes.
So I guess I'd like to close with just understanding where you see FinOps going. And I think this is a really interesting question because it's a little bit like, where do you see the cloud going?
Yeah, futurism.
So what use cases are you looking forward to working on? And sort of, if you're able to speak to it, what role are you looking for Vantage in serving those and helping with those?
It's a very interesting question. On the one hand, I think there's still a lot to be done today just to improve the FinOps capabilities of a lot of the suites of tools that exist. And so I'd really want to see providers and vendors, double down on understanding use cases, the jobs to be done, and then doing those really, really well. Looking out into the future, of course, I think complexity continues to grow. Dynamic reporting is going to be important. AI is the big promise there. Some machine is gonna take the data set I give it, much like the ingredients in my kitchen, and tell me what's possible. And so I think when we are able to marry up the business model and hierarchy with the data that we're collecting from the cloud vendors, and a strong understanding of where the organization is in terms of its FinOps maturity, then we'll end up with a sort of panacea. In an ideal scenario for managing cloud costs and investments. And so I hope that's where we're headed.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a hopeful note to end on. So Warrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure, thank you.
My name is Everett, and if you'd like to learn more about FinOps or more about Vantage, you can find us on the web at vantage.sh.